And the ongoing Audio and Moving Image project, funded by the Mellon Foundation, is preserving and digitizing the audio tapes of this important collection. A final note. Notwithstanding its many strengths and long history, Columbia's collection was relatively little known in the last 75 years before the establishment of a dedicated library position to facilitate modern access and promotion of the collection. When I mounted an exhibition of Columbia's Judaica manuscripts in 2012, I was asked why JTS manuscripts were being exhibited at Columbia. Spoiler, they were Columbia manuscripts. I should also add that a planned exhibition next year will see Columbia manuscripts both at Columbia and at JTS. So in sort of a reversal of this person's question. I have been told many stories of Columbia students and faculty who went to the National Library of Israel's Institute for Microfilmed Hebrew Manuscript to search for relevant primary sources for their research, only to learn that the manuscripts that they needed were back in New York at their home institution. With various initiatives to digitize and promote our collections, Columbia has finally made it back on the map of Judaica research, and I hope that this will continue for years to come. Thank you. Any questions? Don't all ask at once.
Let me ask Stephen here. How much of the collections that we have is well cataloged at this point?
Depends on what you mean by well cataloged. One of the very wise things that Michael Ryan did. So the Alexander position was the donation was given in 2008, and I wasn't hired until 2010. So in the 2 years before my hire, Michael Ryan hired a cataloger to work through the majority of these collections. And Yaron, that was Yaron Biton, and he did a tremendous amount of work. What he found was that there were about double the collections than were expected. There had been a typescript catalog by Isaac Mendel that was produced by Isaac Mendelson in the 40s of about 700 of the manuscripts. But Mendelson didn't think that liturgical manuscripts were interesting. And so including like a prayer book from, lavishly decorated from the 15th century, boring. So there was a lot of stuff that actually didn't make it into that catalog. So Yoram started from Isaac Mendelssohn's collection, but then he found that suddenly there was so much more. And so he got through the majority of it. I would say of the Hebrew manuscripts that I am aware of, and I should say that sometimes we find more, which is a wonderful part of the job. There are probably 50 that are not cataloged. I've had various students do some work on the collections to try and get more cataloged. And sometimes it's language. The language it's not only Hebrew by any stretch of the imagination. It's Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Dutch. Those are the big ones, but then also German, Polish, so it's far beyond my capacity, certainly. So we're trying to get more, but I would say that the vast majority of it is actually in Clio cataloged of the manuscript codices that I know, which is a lot of caveats. Ryan, are there gaps in the collection that you would like to fill with targeted collecting? So yes, some I would like to fill and some I don't feel a need to fill. So for instance, I have the collection development policy for the rare collections states explicitly that we do not collect Judaica Americana, so early American Jewish history. And the reason for that is that the University of Pennsylvania is doing that really, really well, as is the American Jewish Historical Society. As an added bonus, American Judaica prices are incredibly high, and so I'm very happy not to have to collect them. The only exceptions to those, so that Johann Kuhn's manuscript, the grammar that I showed at the very beginning, was a manuscript that I bought because it was actually a Columbia manuscript. So it was related to the university. So that I acquired. But in general, I don't acquire Americana. I'm trying to ensure that our collection is a good teaching collection for Jewish book history, because that is a strong interest of one of the faculty members here, and of course my own interest. So, but I hesitate to buy printed Judaica because we have such a good printed Judaica collection that we have really good examples of nearly everything. I have bought a couple of early prints, but I tend not to, because I can usually find something that works really well in our collection. Oh, so Jane mentions the catalog upgrades to the printed records. We have about, from what I can tell, we have about 3,000 early Hebrew prints. And part of the reason why I wouldn't buy early prints is because I didn't even know what we had. When I looked at our catalog, and I did a sort of a quick and dirty survey of what was on the shelves versus what was in the catalogs, 2 out of 3 books were not cataloged. Or if they were cataloged, they were cataloged according to an old system. There's a lot of sort of Columbia cataloging history here, but the transliteration used for a time was actually Arabic transliteration that was used on Hebrew words. And so you couldn't even find them in the catalog because nobody would know to search in that way for these books. So even books that were cataloged so badly that it was as if they didn't exist. So I was able to hire, over the course of about 3 or 4 years, 3 students who literally went through the rare stacks, picked up every single book, checked it in Clio, and pulled in copy from OCLC where possible. There's still work to be done on that project because we have some unica. We have some books that exist only at Columbia and nowhere else in the world, and those need original cataloging. So that's an ongoing project sort of in the back of my mind, but we haven't quite finished that. But in the process of cataloging the printed collection, we found all sorts of really interesting things. I'm interested, some of you may know I work with a project called Footprints, which traces the provenance of books. And so when I had the students collect information about the books, I asked them to also note if there were any owner's marks or book plates or anything like that, because once somebody was looking at the book, we should get all of the information about the book. And there was one book, a copy, I believe it was Josephus, that had an owner's mark, a book plate from, I can't remember the name now. And so they added it to the catalog record. They added a subject for that person. And I think Jane was the one who got the phone call from a scholar at the Huntington who said, I am cataloging the entire, Jane Siegel, I am cataloging the entire collection of Isaac Newton. And that guy whose book plate is in your collection is the one who bought Isaac Newton's library. Can you check for these particular markings that would prove that the book had been owned by Isaac Newton? And sure enough, they were there. And so that was just one of the many examples of why copy-specific cataloging can be so important. So we didn't know that we owned this book from Isaac Newton's collection, but because we took the time and effort to incorporate that information in our catalog records, we then suddenly had a book that needed to be moved into the vault. But so there were many of those kinds of discoveries. So I'm just gonna go back through the chat a bit. Languages I did, thank you, Jim. Stephen, as far as contributing digitized item to Hebrew University, so it's now the National Library of Israel. They used to have something, they had something that was called the Institute for Microfilmed Hebrew Manuscripts, which actually was established when the State of Israel was established. And this was, there was a whole post-World War II connection that I'm not going to go into here, but the idea was that Judaica collections were scattered around the world. There had just been incredible looting in Europe of important Judaica materials, and there was this effort to at least make them accessible in copy. And so the goal of the project was to go around the world and microfilm all known Hebrew manuscripts in existence. And they actually did come to Columbia, and they microfilmed the 700 manuscripts that we knew about. And they made them available via microfilm. And this is what I mentioned earlier, that students went to Israel to see the catalog of the IMHM and saw that the manuscript they were looking for was actually at Columbia. In the last 10 years, as it's now the National Library of Israel, what was the Hebrew University Library is now the National Library of Israel, and they have created something called Ktiv, which is an online database of digitized Hebrew manuscripts. And we have yes, been contributing our materials to their collection. We digitized the 700 microfilm reels, the 700 manuscripts on microfilm to incorporate into that collection. And the NLI paid for digitization of some 200 manuscripts that they didn't have any record for. They didn't know that we had them. And so they paid for the digitization of those manuscripts so that they could be incorporated into Ktiv as well. So there's been just a huge exposure, increase in exposure to our collection, which is really, really wonderful. Relationships to JTS. So Misha, good question. So we're actually, I mentioned that Columbia Books are going to go to JTS. We're working right now on a collaborative exhibit between the two collections. JTS and Columbia University have the largest collection of materials on the Jews of Corfu, which is an island in Greece that was actually very important during the early modern period, and produced some incredibly beautiful manuscripts. A couple of them you saw in the slides. And so what we'll be doing is we're going to have a piece of the exhibit that's going to be in the Chang Gallery, and that's going to be all Columbia materials. And then half of the exhibit at JTS is actually going to be Columbia materials. So we will be lending some of those materials to JTS for that exhibit. There is a manuscript now at the Jewish Museum from our collection. Actually, was it on there? Yes, the one with the volvels, with the circles, the very colorful with the reds. I don't know if you're, I can. So that's actually in the Jewish Museum's exhibit now. It was supposed to have come down, but then COVID happened, so I'm actually not sure what the story is with it. Hopefully it's coming soon. Hopefully we'll get it back soon. And as far as fighting to acquire the same manuscripts, we try to remain in contact with one another, because the idea is, and this I've had this with a number of my colleagues, but especially the few that are still acquiring rare materials. We just want it to end up in an institute, the materials to end up in an institution where it will be accessible. So our goal is not to fight with each other if we can at all avoid it. And having distinctive collection development policies around rare materials helps us with that tremendously. So sometimes I'll see an item, or a colleague will see an item in an auction, and we'll say, hey, were you thinking about buying this? Or did you even know about it? I'll send things to colleagues of mine and say, you know, I know this fits your collection, where you think maybe you should consider it. Or for instance, we have a large amount of materials on the Jews of Amsterdam. And I will first check with the folks in Amsterdam to see if they want to acquire something before bringing it to New York, because it does make more sense for materials on the Amsterdam Jewish community to stay in Amsterdam. But if they're not going to acquire it, then I'm happy to incorporate it into our collection.